Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome our friends and allies and members from the Queen City of Charlotte, my old hometown, actually. I affectionately now think of Charlotte as the great state of Mecklenburg. Being in the Triangle for the last 40 years, I know there's a bit of the rivalry back and forth, but we certainly are very appreciative of everyone in the Charlotte and greater Charlotte metropolitan area joining us on this legislative preview that Common Cause North Carolina, me, Bob Phillips, will be conducting. And we've got a great hour ahead for you. And to say that we will take just 1 hour, I am determined to bring this program and, as we say, land the plane at the end of our hour. And as people are joining, let me just do a few things. Remind folks that at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat box. Tell us who you are and where you're from. And maybe if you've come from someplace else besides Charlotte, if you, not like me, if you grew up someplace else, that might be interesting for us to learn and know. Then there's also the Q&A box, and you can ask questions anytime. We do have some folks, my colleagues, working, and they're answering those questions for you. But to say we'll get to some questions in the program as well. While we are waiting, though, I wanted to take a few minutes and introduce you to one of my colleagues who is working and living right there in Charlotte. And this is Trey Gibson. Trey, if you want to bring yourself, turn your camera on and unmute your mic, and you and I can have a conversation. Hey, Trey, how are you?
Hey, Bob, I'm doing well.
All right, well, it's 5:02, and I thought while we're letting folks sign on and get acclimated, you and I could take a few minutes and I can talk to you. And that way the good folks in Charlotte can know a little bit more about who you are. Now you come, are you, as we say, hail from Cabarrus County? That's just north of the Queen City. Is that right?
That is right. I moved to Cabarrus County when I was pretty young. Graduated from Central Cabarrus High School.
And you left, I'm telling you, everyone, your story, but correct me, you went to Chicago Northeastern, correct?
Yep, actually, I went to Northwestern University,
Northwestern.
right outside of Chicago. Not to be confused with Northeastern, which I believe is somewhere in New England.
Yeah, I think I just made a mistake. I know of one colleague who will quickly correct me when she has the opportunity. And then your path back to Charlotte, I know you worked, did some work for another nonprofit, but let everybody know, and this is really what's important, what you are doing with Common Cause in Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And I'm happy to be on the call. I've been, since last year when I joined Common Cause, our focus primarily was on providing election education ahead of November and making sure that everyone knew about the changes to the voting process due to COVID-19. So I was specifically working with grassroots organizations that serve Black and Brown communities, because those are the people who are most likely to face barriers that lead to disenfranchisement, including the disproportionate impact of coronavirus on people of color. So last year, I worked with community members to distribute 10,000 of our nonpartisan voter guides and participated in panels throughout the community. And we also expanded our HBCU Student Action Alliance last year to include Johnson C. Smith University. So I've been working with a student fellow there who last year helped us reach thousands of Black and Brown voters through text banking. And she also worked to combat voting disinformation on Election Day. And this year she's doing some work with us on advocacy initiatives, as well as conducting research into student voting trends to help us with our outreach when it's time for the municipal elections. But outside of the campus engagement, what I'm really excited about is one of the things that we're going to be working on this year in Charlotte, which is a series of community conversations that will be held virtually as a way to address various issues that are specific to the Charlotte community and discuss how our local government can play a role in tackling those issues. Because Charlotte is a great city where there are a lot of opportunities, but there's also widening inequality here. And many of our residents just don't have access to the services and information that they need to thrive and be actively engaged in democracy. So I think that our community conversations piece will get us closer to fixing that.
Great stuff. I think you're right. We need to empower the communities, help give them a voice, help them participate in democracy at the local level where so many important decisions are made. So certainly very much appreciate the work you're doing for Common Cause. It's very important. And if folks want to get up with you, the easiest way is how, because I'm hoping that people on this call may have questions and may have thoughts and may certainly join you in the things you're doing. How can they get up with you?
I think the easiest way would be through email, and I can put my email in the chat, and I'll stick around for the Q&A, or I'll be on the call. So if anybody has questions specifically, I can also help answer them then.
All right, Trey. Thanks again. Always good to see you. We hired Trey around the time of the COVID. I saw her when we were doing the interviews, but Trey, I don't think we've seen each other since.
Right.
Yeah, but it's good to see you on the screen here. So thank you very much, Trey. And I guess, folks, we will begin. It is 5:06. So as I said, we're going to fill up an hour. I'm going to talk a little bit about the priorities that we have in the legislature. We'll have someone that many of you know, our old friend, and I don't mean old as in age, but just a friendship we've had for a while, and that's former Charlotte Representative Chaz Beasley. He'll join us and talk a little bit about his insights on some of these big issues we are talking about, which, of course, you may already have figured out. Defending voting rights and fair maps are the two that we primarily will focus on. We'll certainly take questions and answer those for you. We have a couple of other folks that we want to introduce you to, and then, we wouldn't be doing our job as a nonpartisan policy advocate if we didn't then tell you how you can help us and how we can collectively work together to do the job of bettering democracy. So all good things. And so before we talk to Chaz, and he told me I could call him that, we'll be kind of informal here. Let me set up our topic and first off tell you, we do have our priorities that we are working on in the legislature. As I mentioned, voting rights, defending voting rights, and fair maps. We know what we want. We want laws for voting that will make the franchise easier and more accessible. And we certainly want real comprehensive redistricting reform that can create fair maps. Now, what we want and what is likely, unfortunately, I have to say, are probably two different things. But there is a path, we think, to get to where we ultimately hope to have North Carolina. Of course, if we didn't think there was a path, I don't know if we could continue doing our job. I believe we have to always have hope and some optimism. And so let's go or let me get into a little bit about what I want to talk about, and I will set up our conversation with, of course, a PowerPoint. So let's go ahead and start. That is the North Carolina General Assembly that came back to Raleigh last month. They're getting sworn in, and this is what's called the long session that they're in. Primarily, it is to write the state budget, but of course, along the way, they take up a host of other issues, including the things we care about, democracy reform. Like I mentioned, voting rights and redistricting are issues that we care about, and they will be taken up in some form or fashion. So let's take a look at voting first. Last November, we had a record election year for North Carolina with a 75% turnout, and by and large, no major problems. Seems like we should all celebrate that fact and look to make voting laws even better to promote participation. And if we are going to do that, I think the first thing we need to do is simply defend what we have. We want first to keep the laws on the books that made voting by mail easier than ever. We had nearly 1 million people, you might have been one of them, cast their ballot by mail last November. And practically all the laws, however, that were made that made voting from home easier, unfortunately, are going to expire. And those laws included requesting an absentee ballot online, which was a big change, needing just one witness signature instead of two to cast the ballot, and then giving Mecklenburg County and all 100 counties in North Carolina 5 weeks to count the absentee ballots rather than just the 3. As I mentioned, and there is the bill HB 1169. It was a bipartisan bill. And as I mentioned earlier, Most of the laws that bill contained expired December 31st, 2020. We certainly would like to see them made permanent. So that's one of the priorities we have. And then the other thing we want to think about are those long-standing laws we have that have made our state, by and large, a very good voting state, such as a 17-day early voting period and same-day voter registration. We were the first southern state and the most populous state when we passed it at the time. I think in 2007, it went into effect in 2008. So we've had it for a long time. And then casting a provisional ballot that counts. All these are important laws, and we certainly want them to not be tampered with. Proactively, we'll be pushing for such things as automatic voter registration. The idea is to let any 18-year-old citizen of North Carolina be automatically registered to vote. 20 states do it, including our neighbors to the north and south, Virginia and Georgia. Another idea that we'd love to see some discussion on would be making an Election Day a holiday. That might be more of a national kind of debate as well, but certainly it is something that we would like to see discussed. The reality, as I mentioned earlier, is I think we have some great voting laws in North Carolina. There's room for improvements. As you've heard, we have some thoughts about that, but there's the concern we have that we don't see the laws rolled back this session in the name of election security. With my nonpartisan hat firmly on and with the help of the former U.S. Attorney General, I'll say what I think all of us already know, and that is that there was no large-scale voter fraud here or anywhere else. Defending voting rights is one of our biggest priorities this legislative session. Now, our other priority, you can take a guess, it is redistricting. Every 10 years following the census, the legislative and congressional districts are adjusted to account for shifts in population. We know that our population has grown so much in North Carolina that we'll be getting an additional congressional seat, moving from 13 to 14 U.S. House representatives. And that should be a familiar skyline to many of you, but that image right there is to say that our urban areas are growing quickly across North Carolina, while our rural counties have remained stagnant, or in fact, they are losing people. And that's going to mean that more legislative seats are going to have to be created in our cities, and fewer will come out of our rural counties. As you may remember, our lawsuit, Common Cause v. Lewis, did outlaw the use of partisan data. That's looking at past election performances and seeing how people are registered. That is now something that lawmakers are not supposed to do when they draw the maps, and that was a huge win. And there you see folks in front of the North Carolina General Assembly helping us celebrate that victory. Despite our landmark victory in the court, the one thing our case did not address, unfortunately, is who draws the maps. We want a Citizens Commission to do it, but unfortunately, it will be lawmakers doing it, and that's exactly what we're looking at. An image from 2019 in the committee room, lawmakers huddled around the left bottom corner of your screen, indeed putting some of the maps together. Comprehensive redistricting reform is needed. A model bill will be filed this session that shifts the drawing of the lines from lawmakers to what I mentioned is a Citizens Commission. And who are those smiling faces we are looking at? That's the California Redistricting Citizens Commission. They actually have been doing it right, in our opinion, for the last 10 years, letting citizens draw the lines rather than the lawmakers. As I say, folks, unfortunately, our model bill will probably not go anywhere. There we see the leadership of the North Carolina General Assembly, President Pro Tem Phil Berger on the left and House Speaker Tim Moore on the right. Interestingly enough, these two folks, when they were in the General Assembly before 2010, they put their names on bills that were really very much modeled after what California does. In other words, they have been sponsors and supporters of comprehensive redistricting reform in the past. The only difference is they are now in control. And I should say, to be fair, back in those days, pre-2010, we could not get Democrats to support comprehensive redistricting reform. So the key is to try to get everybody together at the same time. In 2019, we did see a better process to some degree. And there we see, again, some of the map making that was going on in a committee room in 2019. That was much more transparency than we had ever seen, and we'd like to see that again. we certainly want to make sure that we also have more context provided as the maps are being drawn. And above all, you can see that's a lot of people jammed into a hearing where maps are being discussed. We need more of that, where the public gets a chance to weigh in on both the front end and the back end of as the maps are being made. And so again, we'll be pushing for that. Ultimately, stopping lawmakers from using partisan data is impossible to enforce. At a minimum, we want legislators to have to explain all their map making decisions. And they do it in real time, not after the fact, but actually as they are creating the maps and as they are splitting neighborhoods, cities, and counties. We, the people, we feel are owed an explanation. If you look at that map, it is familiar. I know it's very familiar to one person on the call, whom I think I will be bringing up right now. And that is a district in Charlotte. And it is a district that, again, we will be talking with our guest now, former District 92 Representative Chaz Beasley. And Chaz, yeah, you've done the right thing. You've turned on your camera and unmuted your mic. You remember the time where we joined you and we walked the neighborhood, I think, with you and the other former legislator who preceded you, Charles Jeter. I'm sure you remember that day, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that it's telling that you had a Democrat and a Republican walking around trying to figure out where the line started and stopped, and both recognizing how much of a problem it was that you basically had to have your Google Maps open to know which house was your constituent and which house wasn't.
Indeed. I mean, I remember you talking to one of the neighbors there who had no idea, anything about how the neighborhood had been split. And I don't think he was even certain, about who was actually representing him. I'd love to first ask a question that many people who are on the call with us, and they know who you are, they may be curious. You served 4 years, you made a great run for the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor and finished near the top in a crowded field. Tell us what you're doing now, what keeps you busy, and I'm sure your career in public service is not over, but maybe you're just catching your breath. I know it's been a tough year for everybody just with COVID and the busy time you have, but what are you up to?
Well, in my day job, I'm a lawyer. I've been working at a law firm the entire time that I've been in the General Assembly, and recently switched to a different law firm. So definitely enjoying my time at my new firm and enjoying sleeping in my own bed a little bit. That's definitely a change from when I was going back and forth up the highway to Raleigh and sleeping in hotels every night. But I'm still going to be around. I'm still going to be involved. I've been helping out with a lot of local parties. I've been helping out with some other electoral efforts too, because I don't want to be one of these people who thinks that just because they don't have a title beside of their name, it means that the work doesn't matter. This is important work, regardless of whether or not I'm on the ballot or not, or whether or not I have a title in front of my name or not. And so I want to continue to help organizations like yours that continue to dedicate themselves to important work.
Well, we thank you for that. And obviously, you are always one of our champions and allies in the State House for the democracy reforms we support. One thing I want to ask, when you were running statewide, what did you see that you felt worked well with regards to voting? And what are some of the things you think need to happen maybe to even improve it?
So I think one of the good things about the way that our state does voting is that we provide people with a lot of opportunities to go at their convenience. Tuesdays are not the most convenient days for a lot of people. There are people that are working 9 to 5s. There are people that are working crazy hours. And so having 17 days that you can choose to go is very, very helpful. One of the things we also saw was that even though there were 17 days, the busiest day is the Saturday before election day. And the next busiest day is the Friday before the Saturday before election day. So we definitely saw that. But one of the things that I also saw going around statewide is that a lot of people really want and are hungry for information about how to vote. They want voting to be simple. They want it to be easy and accessible. And I think that our state has to continue to do more to make sure that voting is simple. It should not be a chore. It should not be an ordeal.
Absolutely. And, we think voting is a nonpartisan issue, or at least it should be viewed that way. And certainly some of the things, whether it's early voting or same day voter registration, both parties are certainly able to take advantage of it, and they do in many instances. Yet we do have those kind of concerns, and what we saw last decade, even prior to your time joining the General Assembly, when there was outright voter suppression laws passed. What are you hearing? I mean, I know you're keeping your ear to the ground. You talk to folks in Raleigh, you talk to colleagues that you work with. How much should we fear in North Carolina that unfortunately there may be an attempt to roll the clock back?
Well, my hope is that that does not happen, but I do think it's something that we have to be very vigilant about. The fact of the matter is that there are some people that believe that the way that they get an electoral advantage is by making it as hard to vote as possible. My belief is that if you have ideas that can compete, then you're not worried about whether or not it's hard to vote, because you believe that your ideas are going to compete regardless of who shows up. That's always been my approach. You mentioned our work with Representative Jeter, who was my predecessor in the General Assembly. He was a Republican. I was a Democrat. When I ran in my seat, it was a competitive seat. It was a seat that was by no means guaranteed to go Democratic. It could have very well stayed Republican. But that meant that I had to wake up and work every single day. And I think that it's important that we have people in the General Assembly and in every elected office who don't take their voters for granted. And unfortunately, gerrymandering and voter suppression mean that a lot of people can rest on their laurels and not pay attention to their constituents, all of their constituents. And so that's one of the reasons why I've been such a strong supporter of independent redistricting and such a strong supporter of voting rights being broadly accessible to everyone, because I think we should go out there and compete for every single vote and every single idea.
Love your passion there. You haven't lost that, I can tell. And you touched on, I mean, obviously you're helping me segue into redistricting, but I do want to ask you one quick question before we talk about that. And that is the fact that you and Jeter, a Republican, did have a relationship that matters. And we all would love to see that opportunity for people across the aisles to work together. We get it. There are differences and people are not going to agree, but yet it just seems like we don't see it enough, or we don't see it as much. Maybe it's not even possible. What was your experience there, and how toxic a partisan divide do we have in the legislature right now?
There are definitely real differences among the parties, and I don't think we should gloss over those. And I don't think that it's wrong to point those out, because voters deserve to know the choices that they're getting. And they are clear choices in this current political environment. That being said, you quickly learn who you can work with on your side of the aisle and on the other side of the aisle. And you have to be very clear with folks about the things that you believe, and the places where you're willing to try to find common ground, and the places where you believe that you have a moral and ethical responsibility to stand your ground and stand up for what you believe in. That was always my approach in the General Assembly. I was always very straightforward. I let everybody know who came into my office that asked me to vote either way on a bill, that I didn't decide on how I was going to vote on a bill until I'd read it. And I think that's the approach that we have to get back to. But really what it comes down to is this: we can't have bipartisanship for bipartisanship's sake. It's not something that we should say, oh, well, let's just all get along and we should bend our will regardless. I mean, if there are real differences, we should be willing to have that debate and that discussion. But I do believe that in politics, we should have opponents and not enemies. I think there are a lot of people that are investing a lot of money in making the parties enemies of each other. And there are a lot of the issues that we're dealing with as a country are because there are people that look at politics as though it is a blood sport and not the means by which we're supposed to make lives better. So I'm determined to be one of those people that is fighting for the ability of people to make their lives better through politics. And I'm going to be honest about where I stand and where I don't stand. I'm going to be honest about what I believe morally and ethically. But if there are places where we can get things done, we should get those things done.
Completely agree with you. You make great points. There are real differences. And indeed, I guess it's something where some people think, oh, there are actually two sides to everything. Well, no, there isn't in my mind. Certainly, there's some things that are just flat out wrong, and there's not the other side to try to, defend. And yet, yes, you want civil, thoughtful debate on the issues where there are differences as well. Let me ask you about Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, and you talked about the gerrymandering that goes on. We'll probably see, I mean, I'm just speculating, some creative ways to perhaps engage in partisan gerrymandering, racial gerrymandering, right in Charlotte Mac, because that's where the new legislative seats are going to have to come from, the Charlottes, the Raleighs, and they'll be leaving some of the rural areas. Uh, what do you sense? What do you think will happen, and how can the good people of Charlotte Mac? What can we do to kind of try to shine the light and fight that? What we really do think is what we'll see in this area, gerrymandering.
So I think that a couple things need to be kept in mind. Number one, in our General Assembly in North Carolina, if one party has a one vote advantage, they draw all the lines because the governor cannot veto the lines that are drawn. I think a lot of people assume that the governor can, the governor cannot. And so what that means is if you have a 51 or 61 to 59 House and a 26 to 24 Senate, that majority party could stack the deck as much as they want to, unless they're brought to court and forced to do otherwise. And that's a real problem. The other issue that we have is that in places like Mecklenburg County and Wake County, that the lines that are being drawn now, I mean, originally they were drawn to be heavily gerrymandered, but now what you're seeing is that a lot of people are saying, well, these places are getting so blue, let's just, concede those counties and draw more gerrymandered counties out in the rural areas. Neither one of those things are to the benefit of North Carolina voters. It's important to remember that it's the districts that are fought over that get the most attention. And it's the legislators that come from those competitive districts, with some very notable examples, that tend to have to be responsive because their careers are on the line if they lose. So, it really comes down to the fact that, yes, their counties are growing. They're growing in a Democratic direction. A lot of our suburban counties are growing in a Democratic direction as well. But it does not mean that gerrymandering should just be allowed to run rampant across the state.
Absolutely not. You're right. When you were seeing the remedial map draw, where we did have at least what we could say is legitimately better transparency than what we have seen in the past, how significant was that? Our hope is that that will be provided again. That protocol was kind of ordered by the court from Common Cause v. Lewis. What might be small wins like that we might be able to push if we can't get comprehensive redistricting reform actually considered this session?
Well, transparency is always better in government. It's important for people to know and be able to see what's happening. I think a lot of times maps have just been drawn in secret, plopped on people's desks, and they say vote for it, yes or no. And again, because of the nature of how lines are drawn in North Carolina right now, you just need one more than the other party to get it done. So we got to make sure that the processes that we put in place always err toward transparency. But even beyond that, it's important to also remember that the way that we put people into office is through these maps. And that if we don't have a legislature that looks like North Carolina, then we're probably not going to get policies that look like North Carolina either, or serve the best interests of North Carolina as a whole either. So the stakes are very high in this. I think that what history has shown is that politicians drawing their own lines for themselves does not work. It's not a positive influence for any party that's got that kind of power, and that we just need to go to the independent model so that other people that don't have a stake in what happens can also make maps that are better. I mean, politicians use sports metaphors all the time, but I really do think it's like having the Super Bowl and everybody being like, I'm going to call my own flags. or playing basketball in the national championship and say, I'm going to call my own fouls. Probably going to try to pull a little bit more than you would in a typical game. And so we've got to make sure that we have outside refs that are making sure the game is being played fairly. It's that simple.
Again, totally agree with you. Last question, and it may be more of a philosophical kind, and you're a young person. Your youth is probably belies the years that you are. I'm not asking you, what your age is, but did you come away from your time in public service? I know you pivoted for a run statewide office, and that's a very daunting, and I applaud you for making that run, because I know that's not easy to do. And I think anybody who seeks public service and wants to serve the public, I certainly commend them regardless of what party and what office. But when you think about your time in the legislature and what you saw, and again, I'm referencing your youthfulness too, did you come away hopeful or pessimistic, or how do you feel when you try to compartmentalize and think back to those years that you were serving? I know you enjoyed it, but in terms of the bigger picture, what do you think?
Well, I definitely earned every gray hair in this beard of mine that I've grown since the pandemic started. But I will say that there are definitely things that I'm hopeful about, and definitely things that I am very concerned about. I am hopeful that you will continue to see us be able to rally behind consensus legislation when the emergencies come. So we were able to do quite a bit when it came to COVID release. That was consensus stuff. My concern is that you're starting to see more and more people elected to the legislature, because they're coming from more and more balkanized seats, that come in with an extreme fringe view of politics. They come to it from like the corners of social media. They come to it from some places where they don't want to actually figure out how to get things done because the other party is their enemy. That is a concern to me, because we did not become the state that we are through that approach. Now, again, as I said earlier, I'm not one of these people that believes in going along to get along in politics. There are real differences, and we should be able to say that, and we should be willing to talk about that. But that being said, we also have to be very, very clear that there are times where we do not have the luxury of doing nothing. And in this pandemic, we are clearly seeing the danger of doing nothing. We've seen 490,000 Americans die in large measure because leaders decided to do nothing. We have to get past that. And if we continue to elect people that refuse to stand on principle, refuse to stand up when the time calls for it, and refuse to act when the time calls for it, we will be worse off for it. And we have to be willing to say that and say it clearly. And if the last year has not shown anything, I think it's shown that very clearly as well.
Again, well stated. Former Representative Chaz Beasley, certainly appreciated everything you did and how you worked with us when you served in the State House. I know you have a great career in front of you in public service. I'm sure the door is not closed on that, but we'll be certainly looking forward to continuing our conversation and continuing seeking your wise counsel and advice. So thank you so much for being on this call and everything you've done to help improve the lives of the people you served and what you were still doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I will then transition into wanting to introduce to everyone someone else from the great state of Mecklenburg, as I affectionately say, Charlotte. This is one of the examples of someone who helps us out in many ways. We have folks of our 30,000 members across the state who volunteer and do things for us or contribute money to help us do our work. And this is Elliot Feldman, who has now appeared on the screen. Hello, Elliot. How are you?
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Doing well. I can't remember. I know we chatted yesterday. Did I ask you this? And if I did, I apologize. You are not from Charlotte originally, or you are?
No, originally from New York City. It's, you could usually tell from the accent and But I've been in North Carolina since 1992, so almost a native.
Very good. Well, I don't really detect that New York accent. Don't know that I hear the Southern accent either, but it's certainly I don't hear the New York accent. Well, you're a great example. Again, you're in Charlotte. You've been there for a number of years, and you certainly, and we very much appreciate it, have contributed to Common Cause and helped us again with our work. What motivates you? Why are you a friend of ours, I guess would be my question.
Okay, good question. I'm old enough to remember John Gardner in the early 70s, but I did not, for those who don't know, the founder of Common Cause, but I really didn't get involved until more recently here in North Carolina when I saw the impact of gerrymandering and how one party could get 50, 52%, 54% of the vote and wind up with only 1/3 of the seats in whatever legislative body we're talking about. And so that was disturbing. And I had the opportunity to be part of a plaintiff in the lawsuits against Rucho and the NCGA a few years ago. And we were fortunate to have won those cases all the way up to the Supreme Court, except for the Supreme Court. And but I got very upset by the situation where we didn't have fair maps. They were completely gerrymandered, and we had no say in the matter. And organizations like Common Cause were working to change that situation. And now we're going into 2021. Where, as Chaz said, we have reapportionment coming up, and we don't want a duplication of 2011.
Indeed. Well, Elliot, thank you again for your support of Common Cause. And who knows, I'm not saying that we want this to happen, but we may need to have you as a plaintiff sometime in the next year or two. Litigation, we're not saying that that's exactly what will happen, but we may in fact have to play that card. Thank you again for everything you do to help us. And hang on the call. Folks, we'll be getting to questions in just a minute, but I want to introduce one of my colleagues also who helps us connect with each of you. And that's Zinnia Bynum, who is from a county west of Charlotte, Rutherford County. Zinnia, I know you wanted to say hello to everybody, so why don't you do that?
Hello, everyone. My name is Zinnia Bynum, as Bob said. I am the development coordinator here at Common Cause North Carolina, which does imply that at some point during this little chat that I'm giving you, I will give my pitch for support. But before that, I do want to, go in depth about what supporting Common Cause actually does for your, the democracy for here in North Carolina. And so when you invest in our work, what you're doing is going to help us fight for fair maps, to make sure that our wins in the court are defended, and that during this most crucial year, we are not going to see politicians trying to pick their voters instead of vice versa. It also goes to help amplify your voice in the legislature. We have our lovely lobbyist, Jane, as well as Bob, talking with politicians on a daily basis, making sure that democracy is on all of their agendas. And then finally, it goes to help us support our one-of-a-kind HBCU Student Action Alliance. We believe that our student leaders are, a part of the next generation of activists, organizers, politicians, and, politically motivated people here in North Carolina. And we want to make sure that they have the tools needed to be successful. And your support can take many forms. You can help volunteer, you can notify your networks, or you can give directly. And if that is something you'd be interested in doing, please feel free to visit our chat. I have put a link there that you can follow through. And this is the best way to help support Common Cause, because it allows you to be directly involved in supporting a freer and fairer democracy for everybody here in North Carolina. So with all of that being said, I would love to pitch it back over to Bob Phillips.
Thanks very much, Zinnia. I appreciate all you do for Common Cause. And folks, I know I'm always a little sheepish to say, hey, we we welcome your support, but we certainly do. And as you all know too, being a 501c3, any gift you give to that is a tax deductible gift. But let's get on to the questions that you all have perhaps put in the chat box, and I'll bring in the aforementioned Jane Pinsky, who has been my colleague for quite some time here at Common Cause. And then our other colleague, Brent Lawrence. Jane, I see a blank screen. There you are. And Brent, as Jane is gussying herself up for this, why don't you tell us what the first question is?
Yeah, first question is a two-parter, but assuming there's no citizens commissions drawing our districts this year, will the principles from the Lewis case govern at all how the process will be applied in 2021? And then the second part of that question is, if not, will we be back in the courts if we see stark gerrymandering, and will that process be fast enough to possibly impact the 2022 elections?
Great question, Jane. I know at 5:40, I keep track of my time. I'm going to let you handle that. And I'm also going to invite Chaz to open his mic and appear back, because although you can answer that, there might be some questions that we want Chaz to help us out with as well. But Jane, you know the answers to that question.
Unfortunately, I do. I say unfortunately because legally, the standards from Lewis, the only one that holds is the idea that partisan gerrymandering can't be done. The procedure that we used last time that created the increased transparency depends on the goodwill of the legislators. And that is something that I know Bob has been working at hard, as have I, to make sure that we continue to have increased transparency. And as to whether or not we'll be back in court, if we're not, it will be the first time in more than 50 years that North Carolina has not had a court case.
And Chaz, to that point too, you being a former member, you know your district, and you just can't help, even if you have the best of intentions, if you have the power of the pen, to not skew it. Is that right? I mean, is that a fair point?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people in the General Assembly, I mean, there are 170 legislators. I can name to you the ones that just have an encyclopedic knowledge of the geography of North Carolina. They know where voters live. They don't have to look at a map to be able to tell you which parts are trending red and which parts are trending blue.
Yeah, just thus, I mean, you make a great point, both of you do, about how difficult it is to enforce this this standard we have in North Carolina. So great answers. Brent, how about the next question?
Yeah, question about what can we, the people here, help? What can they do to help this year make sure we have fairer maps, and ultimately end gerrymandering? I
love that question. You've got two registered lobbyists on this, but I'm going to let Chaz answer it now, because you're one of the citizens out there. What can the citizens do? And then Jane, I'll let you respond.
So I will tell you that legislators pay attention to their inboxes. There are a lot of people that just assume that when they email legislators, it's going into a black hole. One of the things that legislators pay attention to is not if they're getting the exact same form email 50 times, whether or not they're getting 50 emails on the same topic that are all unique. So if they're getting a lot of correspondence from people about voting rights, about gerrymandering, will they do something different? Maybe, maybe not, but they will pay attention and they will believe that there is public support for those ideas and that the public is watching. And sometimes that's what you really need in order to put pressure on legislators, to let them know whatever they decide to do, that you are paying attention. And so I would definitely encourage everyone, reach out to your legislator, reach out to your legislators in both the House and the Senate, and let them know that this is an important issue and that you want to have fair representation in the General Assembly and in Congress.
That's a wonderful answer, Jane. As Chaz says, the citizens' voice is really more powerful than ours.
Oh, far more powerful. They know that you and I get paid. I think you can sum up what Representative Beasley said in not so polite a way, which is that nagging counts. You need to keep a constant conversation going with your elected officials. I think emails are great. I think that they probably pay even more attention to an old-fashioned handwritten letter because they don't get many of those anymore. And I would urge everybody, start now. Tell them you want fair maps, tell them what you want, and be prepared to demand public input, public hearings before the maps are drawn and after the maps are drawn, and be prepared to say exactly how you want the maps drawn for your community. Don't just say, we want fair maps. Say, in Charlotte, this is how the line should be drawn, or in Boone, I know we have some people from outside Charlotte, whatever your community is.
And Jane, very respectfully, of course, you excel at that nagging the honorables, right?
I do. As I say when I talk, if you can get your spouse to take the trash out and your kid to make the bed, you've learned how to lobby. I've got 4 kids and a husband. I'm pretty good at nagging. And I think anybody out there has persuaded somebody to do something they didn't want to do at some point.
It's a fair point. I think you're right in terms of just, what we do at home and in our own homes. That can apply to talking truth to power, as they say. So, Brent, next question, please.
Yeah, sticking with redistricting, what's the impact, the delayed census data what's the impact going to be on the redistricting process this year in 2021?
Jane, why don't you give the quick answer, and then I want to kind of follow up something with Representative Beasley. What is that impact?
Well, we should just start by saying that usually about this time, North Carolina is getting its census data. And about this time, we know how many congressional seats we're going to have. Knowing how many congressional seats we're going to have is called reapportionment. We divide up the 435 seats. Knowing how many we're going to have is part of that process. And then we get data that shows where the people across the state live. So we're starting to draw maps by March and April. Not being able to draw maps until September, which is what it looks like, and not knowing whether we're going to have another seat till July means that we're going to be hard put to hold elections early next year.
So Chaz, I mean, you talk to constituents and you still probably talk to people, and how much do they understand this? And even this throws the Charlotte City Council and School Board elections probably postponing would be my guess. This is a challenge, is it not?
Oh, it's a huge challenge. I think that a lot of people don't necessarily pay much attention to the nuts and bolts of reapportionment and redistricting. And it gets really, really granular and really, really specific really fast. But one of the things that I think is a positive is that I would say many more people understand the term gerrymandering and know the specifics of gerrymandering in 2020 following the 2020 elections than they did following the 2010 elections. Mm-hmm. And I think that is because they understand now just how much who their district or who their representative is or who their senator is in their particular district affects their everyday lives. But yeah, I think that the fact that we're now looking at September 30th for census data, and it has been moved back several times, so it could be later than September 30th, is going to definitely affect municipal elections. Typically, Charlotte has their elections in mid-September. We're not even going to get the data back until the end of September at earliest. So this is definitely going to affect municipals, will probably affect other races up the ballot as well.
Yeah, just what a year it is. What a year we had, what a year we're having. Brett, maybe one more question at 5:48. We'll try to be real quick. I got 2 other things I got to do before we end the hour. One more.
All right, last one around federal issues with the new Congress and the new president's administration. Is there any hope for something like HR 1 or positive momentum with voting rights legislation at the national level?
HR 1 for the People Act has some wonderful proposals that would be great to codify, as I have learned from our folks at the National Common Cause Office. This legislation will probably be considered in March by the House, but the Senate, unfortunately, because of that 60-vote filibuster rule they have, won't be able to get it done. So as good as the proposals, and it includes redistricting reform as well, it's just not going to happen. And Chaz, what do you think about that filibuster rule? It seems kind of ridiculous, doesn't it?
It definitely does, considering that the last time, specifically the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized was under President Bush, I believe back in 2005, and it was overwhelmingly bipartisan.
Right.
So even though the For the People Act is very much aspirational in a lot of its asks, and there are a lot of things in there that I think should happen and should, quite frankly, have already happened. When it comes to the Voting Rights Act specifically, that really should be something that there should be at least a possibility of getting to yes to. Now, the world is very different in 2021 than it was in 2005. 16 years has made a world of difference. But I would dare someone to vote against the John Lewis Voting Rights Act on the floor of the Senate. And sometimes you do have to put these types of things up and have them voted on. Having worked in the United States Senate for the former Majority Leader, Harry Reid, I can tell you that it can be very difficult to get to 60 on just about the most consensus of consensus legislation. But I can tell you that there should be, and I would be shocked if there was not, a real genuine push for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act this session.
You know, I forgot that you had your stint in Congress, so thanks for reminding us that. And you're exactly right. I believe the John Lewis Act is H.R. 4, so it's, I think, a separate standalone. And even when I was talking to our friends at National Common Cause, there is hope. And you would think, how could senators vote against that, particularly, again, when it was reauthorized, when George W. Bush was president at that time. You know, we could go on and on. It's 5:51, and I hate to call this, pull the plug on it, but former Representative Chaz Beasley, again, thank you so much. Look forward to talking to you soon. Jane is clapping. Jane, I'll even say thank you to you too as well.
Thanks,
and thanks again to both of you. I guess with 9 minutes left, let me just remind folks of a couple things that I think are important. And one is we want you to stay informed. This is kind of how we ask you to help us, and that is to be informed. Follow us on our social media platforms, Facebook, tweeting. What's that other thing? We call that Instagram. I guess I don't do that a lot, but we do at Common Cause. But it's a great way to stay informed. And then there are the other things about being active. Chaz mentioned about, emailing, writing a letter, those kinds of things to connect with your lawmakers, contacting your lawmakers, even a visit in the days that we can. We look forward to that when we, can do that. And then there's what we see a picture of is one of our lobby days where we actually have folks come and help us again with our voice. So there is our Common Cause webpage, and we certainly invite you to visit that anytime. And one of the ways that people help us out, as I mentioned, is just being active. And at 5:52, I'm going to bring up one of our longtime Charlottean friends. And folks, you're going to know who this person is. He was a bit of a celebrity in Charlotte, still is. But once upon a time at an event in Charlotte, he stood up and asked the former president, George W. Bush, a very a pointed question. That's Harry Taylor. Harry, I see the screen, your name come up real quick. And let me get you up if you can. Can you turn your camera on and unmute your mic? Well, I guess kind of waiting on, yeah, I think he is. Harry can hear us. Harry, can you turn your, Harry, if you can't turn your,
There, got it.
okay. Harry, again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for everything you do for Common Cause. And I just have time to really ask you just one question. I apologize, but why are you you could be doing lots of things, just enjoying life. And yet you are so busy, you're so active, and you work with so many of the Good Government Coalition organizations, including Common Cause, and we're so grateful for it. Why have you spent time helping us?
I learned what gerrymandering was when I was in 7th grade in a social studies class. But in 2008, I ran for U.S. Congress. I was really irritated with the Iraqi war and environmental destruction throughout that administration's term. And I ran for U.S. Congress in District 9, North Carolina, which has been in the same political party's control since John F. Kennedy was in the White House. During the time that I ran for office, I experienced firsthand what it's like to be in a district that's gerrymandered and how it tears the guts out of our democracy. Not long after the election, because of my experience, I started speaking and writing and marching for fair maps, to get rid of gerrymandering, maps that weren't drawn by political parties to protect their power. Within 18 months, I bumped into Jane through the courtesy of the Charlotte Observer and started working with you guys at Common Cause, volunteering, collaborating, marching, gathering, and donating. And Tom Ross might be on this conversation. I stolen a phrase with him from Tom. He always says, we can't fix our issues and problems if we can't fix our democracy. And we know that democracy is under attack, like probably most of us have ever experienced in our lifetimes. And that always causes me to think, if organizations like Common Cause aren't here supporting the efforts for fair democracy, where would we be in the state? We are so immensely fortunate that Common Cause is here. You know, they get things done, but they can't do it alone. And that's where just the general public, citizens come in. This is important work. It's a crucial cause. The people at Common Cause are committed. And I hope that if you don't already do it, that you'll reach out to them and find a place for you. It's really super important work.
Harry, thanks so much for being in the trenches with us. And I know you're not going anywhere. We look forward to continuing the righteous fight. I wish I had more time to chat, but I know you and I will be talking a lot here in the future. But thank you for everything you do. So folks, before we finish up with 4 minutes left, I want to thank obviously Harry and Chaz and Trey and Jane. And I want to bring up one more special guest here, and that is Gregory Jenkins, who is one of our Common Cause North Carolina board members. And there he is. Gregory lives in Wake County, but has been on the board for a few years. And Gregory, you're busy, you've got a young family, and I just want to get people to hear from you a perspective of why you have been helpful to us in serving as a board member of Common Cause North Carolina.
Yeah, so thanks, Bob, and I'll make this really quick. But you know, for me, voting rights has always been important. I grew up in South Georgia. You know, I've seen the impacts that happens to communities, that are lasting. But I would think that when I was approached about joining, voting rights, gerrymandering, and then when I heard about the HBCU action group, I mean, that just put it over the top for me. I think, having that diverse approach to attacking some of what I would call just attacking the disease, right? Of people trying to keep people from voting, people trying to, gerrymandering the districts. It just felt like a worthwhile cause. And when I talked about it with my wife, we both agreed that this was going to impact my son, yours up as well. And we wanted to try to put some time and energy into making the world a little bit better.
Excellent answer. We can't thank you enough for being a part of us. And before we go, I got to get you to, you're kind of covering up the face of the person behind you. Tell us who that is.
So this is the gentleman. He was one of two people who actually went to the North Pole. And I've been changing it for Black History Month. Just to educate people along the way that, that Blacks have really been instrumental in our history, and then also encouraging people to go out and take that little bit of information and do some research themselves so they can learn more about it, right, over time.
What a great and timely message. And you have the best backgrounds of any person I know on Zoom calls, and I could see it first just I guess it's the winter gear, and I couldn't see that. Oh, it's a person. So thank you for, again, thank you for everything you do for Common Cause. And thank you for also lifting up what we all want to think about, and this being Black History Month as well. So Gregory, I know we'll be seeing you soon here as well. So there you have it, folks. It's 5:59. I can't thank all the people who were on this call enough. And I really can't thank you all enough as well, just to help us do the work we do. We're what we call the People's Lobby. That's one of the ways we describe ourselves at Common Cause North Carolina. Certainly, if you want to help us out, go to our website. Want to learn more about what we do, that's a great place as well. You can connect with those of us here in Raleigh anytime. And I'll close with, as someone mentioned, our founder, John Gardner. And he once said, all excellence involves discipline and tenacity of purpose. All excellence involves discipline and tenacity of purpose. Well, that's kind of what we are about, trying to display that tenacity and purpose and what we are seeking, and that is an excellence in democracy. So together, I think we can get there. As I mentioned at the top of the call, I'm a native of North Carolina, and I'm very proud to say that I grew up in the great state of Mecklenburg. And just like you, I'm committed to making this state the very best it can be. So thank you all for being on this call. Thank you all for helping support the work that we do. So with that, I will say so long, everybody. Good evening.